If you're like me, you'd probably need to leave your computer running for many hours to download most of the games on the Steam page. But what if we made a game that doesn't require you to wait that long? Okay, theoretically I could make a Pong game and as a result make a game that waits only a few kilobytes, but that's too simple and I also wanted to make an original game that would take more than 15 minutes to beat, by a new player at least. I decided to make a Tetris clone with a twist. Instead of controlling the falling shapes, you control a character and your goal will be reaching a coin located on top of the level. And that was about it when it comes to my idea of what the game should look like at that time. I started off by drawing the frame and then I moved on to designing blocks. By the way, I made a lot of visual tweaks to objects off camera, usually to change their size. So if some things look different in between the cuts, that's why. Here we have the texture of falling pieces. Notice how I limited my color palette to only 2 colors. That's because the less colors you use, the less your game weights. So I went with yellow and bluish black. I'm satisfied with how it turned out. Next, I made a texture of the indestructible platform on the bottom of the level, and it's one of those textures which haven't changed one bit. Now, as you probably know, the pieces in Tetris have that choppy movement. So I made it so they move 16 pixels every 30 hundredths of a second. And here's the result. I think it looks pretty good. Since we got that worked out, I decided to make them shaped like Tetris pieces. I didn't make every single variation, I decided that 30 should be plenty. After I got it done, I made it so the pieces spawn at a random spot at the x-axis. Next, I designed the coin the player will have to reach to complete the level. I wasn't really satisfied with how the coin looked, but I decided to focus on that later. After all, I still haven't made the character we control, so I got to it. Things the player interacts with should stand out from the rest, but it's kind of tricky if you're working in a 1-bit color palette. So I gave him a 2-frame idle animation, which makes him more noticeable and lively. Looks good, but it needs a walking animation. Also, the character isn't facing the right direction half the time. Having to work on a walking animation of a 16x16 two-colored character was especially challenging. Not to mention that one leg is only 8 pixels, most of which is an outline. While making a walking and running animation, it's important to remember about the vertical motion. We are trying to draw a human character, not a vehicle on wheels after all. Now that the walking animation is done, I got to making pushing animations. At that time, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to make the player able to push objects around, but I thought it would be cool if the character could visually react to the environment. I also made the jumping and falling animation. I then moved on to make the hitboxes for the pushing animation so the game knows when to trigger this animation. So if these hitboxes are overlapping with a block and the player is holding A or D, the animation plays. Our character needed a dying animation, so I went with a 2-frame explosion. Next, I prepared the game over text. The font I used doesn't support the higher font sizes, so I had to make some changes. I went back to change the look of the coin and I drew it with the capital G, as in goal. I also gave it a spinning animation. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? I decided to add a counter to the game at the bottom of the screen, so I'm using at least some of the space on the sides of the screen. While I was setting up the third counter, I made it so every 1/100th of a second it goes up by 1. However, the game is running at 60 FPS, so instead of going up by 1 every 100th of a second, it goes up every frame, which makes it almost twice as slow. But I did realize it and fixed it later. It was about time to come up with a name for my game. I wanted something that will sound like a reference to the Tetris, the original game, so I named it Ted Risotto, because honestly, why not? The game will have multiple levels, each one will be more difficult and have new obstacles. For the second level I made this device that fires a laser every now and then. For levels 3 and 4, I drew snakes that will walk back and forth. Touching them will lead to game over. The game sends you to the beginning of the level whenever the character dies. I decided that it makes the game far too difficult, so I made it that the player has 3 lives and there is a chance of getting an extra life that you have to collect at the start of each level. I made it so you have an infinite amount of lives at the first level, because I thought there is no point of lives at the first level if you can just restart after losing a life and have 3 lives all over again. I added some more obstacles for the final level and also a spring that works similarly to the one from Super Mario Bros. Now, if there is anything the game needs, it's sounds. To make sounds, I used a free program called BFXR. Here's what I came up with. Okay, and here's the final game. So how much space does the game occupy exactly? Well, the thumbnail doesn't lie, it's 1.5 megabyte. You can download the game through the link in the description. It's free, of course. I don't see game dev becoming a reliable source of income anytime soon anyway. I guess that's all. Later.